Hello and welcome to our final session in this collaborative webinar series hosted by Supporting Innovative Practices, Open Access, and California PBIS. Over the past two sessions, we've built a shared foundation. First, exploring why inclusive PBIS matters, and then how integrating universal design for learning strengthens Tier 1 by designing for the full range of learner variability. Today, we bring that work into practice. Even with strong systems in place, variability shows up in real time. Students may disengage, become overwhelmed, or respond in unexpected ways. The goal is not to eliminate these moments, but to be prepared for them. This session focuses on how Tier 1 systems are both preventative and responsive, how we design environments that reduce barriers, and how we respond in the moment in ways that maintain access, engagement, and belonging. This final session is about coherence, connecting design and response into a system that works for all learners, not just most. My name is Megan Gross, Program Support Specialist with Supporting Innovative Practices, and I'm honored to be joined by our partners from Open Access and California PBIS, along with my SIP colleagues who are here to support your learning. A few quick reminders. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Padlet for 30 days, along with resources and your certificate of completion. ASL interpretation and closed captioning are available. Thank you so much, languagers, for interpreting. We encourage you to engage in the chat and share questions in the Q&A. Today, you may start thinking about specific behaviors, and because we know that context is important, we won't be able to provide specific strategies for specific behaviors, but we can address the system at the classroom and school level. As we begin, consider this reflection. When students struggle in the moment, do our responses bring them closer to learning or further from it? This is where design becomes action. And with that, I'll turn it over to our team from Open Access and California PBIS.
Thank you so much. My name is Emily Desjardins. I am one of the UDL AT content leads with the Open Access Project. And with me is also the wonderful Patty. You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Patty Shutter. I'm a program coordinator with Placer County Office of Education.
And we're excited to be here with you for our third session. So our first session was really setting that foundation of, why is this important? Why is it important to take UDL and PBIS and merge them and make sure that we're really supporting all of our learners with that Tier 1 PBIS expectations. And then our second session was really designed to dive into how to teach those expectations in a way that really includes all of our learners. And today our focus is going to be really how we're responding. So that responding with purpose and really creating those preventative and instructional Tier 1 systems and practices that support all students. So our hopeful objectives today are that after this session, you will all be able to describe Tier 1 systems and preventative practices that support all learners, that you'll be able to explain how to respond in the moment to really support that engagement and access, and then also be able to apply those Tier 1 strategies to create those inclusive, proactive, and instructional practices. In our last session, we did not have quite enough time to go through all of the questions in the answers from the Q&A section. And then there were also some questions on the survey. So we just wanted to call out a couple of these really quickly and make sure we didn't leave you hanging. And there will be time at the end for questions as well. So feel free to ask any as we're going along as well. If we don't get into all the questions, we'll make sure we include a little follow-up email that just addresses those and shares any resources. So I promise we won't leave you hanging. So a couple of questions that we just wanted to call out. We had a few people asking for links to those task analysis and visual supports. And so we have linked those on the home base document. Those are available for you guys. Please feel free to take them and use them. And I think it was also addressed that if you have access to symbol sticks and unique curriculum, that there are lots of task analysis embedded within that as well. One of the things that came up a couple times as well was really asking, how does this look differently for high school students? Not necessarily different, but we're going to make sure we share lots of high school examples today as well. And so I think the biggest thing, and I think this came up a little bit in the last session too, is really making sure that all learners are a part of creating these clear expectations and have some voice. And although I think that's important at every level, in the high school level, I think there's an added importance of really making sure they're a part of the process. There was an excellent question about kind of this, the specific question was about an enrichment teacher and having small portions of time with the students she worked with, and just kind of like really how does she figure out how to utilize PBIS in a way that's kind of consistent, even though her schedule's changing a lot and the students in and out of her class are a lot. And so we have a couple of examples we're going to share today, and we're going to address that specifically. But those times of the day that maybe are a little bit more unique and more challenging, there's some specific strategies we can use to make sure we address those. And then there was another question that was really, hey, we're doing PBIS, but how do we start integrating this UDL piece? It's so unfamiliar to us, unknown. How do we get started? And I think the biggest thing is just really intentionally starting to think about how we can increase access for all in small little steps. And so we'll do our best to answer that throughout today's session as well. But hopefully by the end, you'll have a pretty good grasp. So we just wanted to make sure these questions didn't go unanswered, unaddressed. And hopefully by the end, we'll have all of these answered as well. So before we dive into our new content, we always like to start by just a little recap from our last session. And I'm going to call out that is direct neuroscience from the guidelines, taking a couple minutes to really activate that prior knowledge in any setting, whether it's PBIS looking at expectations, whether it's the beginning of a lesson. It's really helpful for our brains to know which file to open up to put the information in, and it really reduces that cognitive load. So just a little checking in about prior knowledge. In our last session, we really kind of did an overview of what does the UDL framework tell us about learning, and what does it mean to provide multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. And we talked about how all three of these are really connected to networks in our brain. And so when we're looking at the engagement strand in our brain, in that affective network, it's really asking the question, why should I care about this, right? So how are we making sure that our students are motivated and interested and excited to follow the expectations of our schools? And that representation strand is really connected to the recognition network, and it's asking, what am I learning? And so really being thoughtful about how are we making sure that all of our learners on campus can perceive and understand the expectations. And then finally looking at that action and expression strand and that strategic network, which is really asking that question, how do I show what I know? And making sure that we're really making sure all our students can demonstrate their understanding of expectations before it's a requirement. And then we went on to talk a little bit about how does this actually look when we're teaching expectations across the school setting. And we talked about that importance of really making sure that those expectations are clear, they're visible, they're practiced, and that they really have a connection to purpose, meaning, and connection. And so that they're just a valuable part of what's happening on the campus. When we're teaching those expectations, making sure we're really teaching them in multiple ways so that all of our students can access them, really making sure we're using visuals, that we're practicing in a variety of modalities, and that we're really connecting it to students' experiences, prior knowledge, and then for that bonus with engagement, their interests as well, of course. And then when we're thinking about that action and expressions piece, really making sure that we're providing those supports and scaffolds, those reminders, those visuals, and really allowing for a variety of ways for students to show how they do understand these expectations, and make sure we have some flexibility in that piece. We're going to start with a little inclusive welcome. And I'm going to ask you all to think about this before I start this Zoom poll. I would love for you to think about a time where someone at work acknowledged your effort, your hard work, your effort. And I'm going to send out a Zoom poll in a second, and I want you to think about, you are welcome to click as many as you want, doesn't have to just be one. Maybe you were energized, motivated, relieved, seen, or maybe you're still waiting and you've gotten no response, no acknowledgement. Hopefully that's not the case. But I'm going to go ahead and launch this and let's pick as many that apply for you. We have a couple that are not being acknowledged, and I'm sorry. That makes me sad. But they're coming in. We've still got waves of coming in, so I'm going to give it a minute before I share. Thank you guys so much for filling all these out, though. It's always fun when you guys engage with the poll, too. Extra fun. I'm really sad that some people are not getting acknowledged at work. This makes me really sad. All right, lots of answers still coming in, so I'm going to give it one more little minute before I respond. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So let's see, 46% of you felt energized, 66% felt motivated, 47% felt relieved, 59% felt seen, and 4% of you are still waiting. And I'm sorry that you haven't gotten feedback. That's very, very sad. And I would love for us to notice something. No one said, also, we might not have given you the option to say this, but nobody said, I didn't need that. I was just doing my job, because feedback feels really good. It feels good to know that we're doing the right thing. And I think a really important part of this is that it doesn't lower the bar or make it so, it's really important that acknowledgement fuels what we do and really ensures that we know we're doing the right thing. And so, oftentimes this comes up, I think, in PBIS, like, why are we acknowledging the things that are just expected of everyone? And it's exactly for this, because it's really important that everyone on your campus feels seen, valued, motivated to keep going, and also know you're doing the right thing. Keep it up. This is great. And so a huge part of our focus today is going to be just around this. I'm going to pass it on to Patty for this next section.
All right. So we're going to be delving into monitoring and acknowledging those social emotional skills and routines and providing instructional responses. So Emily set the stage really nicely for the reasons why we want to make sure that we monitor and acknowledge those social emotional behavioral skills and routines. You spend a lot of time teaching these routines. And if you were with us last time, we gave you lots of different ways to be able to teach and practice these routines to make sure our students have them. But once we have them, we want them to keep doing them. We want them to keep demonstrating those skills at the appropriate times. So if we go on to the next slide, there's a really important reason why we acknowledge very specifically the skills that we're teaching, and anchoring it with universal design kind of principles and practices. Our brain does really well on feedback. Actually, there are neurobiological responses whenever we're given acknowledgement and feedback that are important for learning, that are important for remembering what to do, and that are important for just our sense of feeling like we're safe and like we belong. So we've got the dopamine and reward circuits. Praise activates those learning pathways. And then, of course, it also activates the region of the brain that's really responsible for those feelings of safety. And when we're safe, we're ready to learn. So the brain does well on feedback. It sets the foundation and really helps with learning. There's also other bodies of research outside of neurobiology that indicate the need for using acknowledgement or reinforcement or feedback. A lot of people think that in PBIS, it all comes from the behavioral theory. And a bit of it does. We know from behavioral theory and the principles of reinforcement that behavior that is reinforced continues to happen. And when we give heavy doses of reinforcement, when a skill is being learned, that skill is oftentimes learned faster. And then once a skill is learned, behavior theory tells us that when we intermittently acknowledge or reinforce that behavior, that skill or that behavior maintains. So we've got a wide body of research from behavior theory that indicates that using acknowledgement and reinforcement can really be helpful in learning. But we also know from relational theory that the use of acknowledgement in specific doses compared to corrective or negative feedback or interactions is actually really important for relationships and feelings of safety. And this comes all the way back from the 1970s. John Gottman identified or discovered this magic relationship ratio. He could predict which couples in marriage therapy would stay married based on the number of positive interactions compared to those that were more negative or corrective. And that 5-to-1 ratio is the magic ratio for positive relationships. And it doesn't just apply to marital relationships. We know that we have more positive feelings of relationship, belonging, and safety with coworkers who give us a higher positive to corrective rate of feedback. And the same goes for teachers and students. Go ahead to the next one for me. So in PBIS, one of the core practices or elements is to engage in acknowledgement of those social, emotional, behavioral skills. And this includes behavior-specific praise at those high rates. We like to help teachers and staff and all adults on campus try to reach a 5-to-1 ratio, because we know that that's the ratio that allows people to feel that sense of belonging and that safety and that positiveness in a relationship. We also, in PBIS, often include things like tokens or tickets. And this is a form of intermittent kind of acknowledgement or reinforcement that can be exchanged for other reinforcing items. It can be exchanged through a school store or through a drawing or through entry into a special school-wide or classroom-wide activity that is identified and selected by the students. And in PBIS acknowledgement, these are delivered by all staff across all settings and routines on campus. So acknowledgement systems aren't just for the teachers in the classrooms. We want to see acknowledgement being handed out on the playground, in the cafeteria, on the bus, wherever students are. We want acknowledgement to be offered, and by all staff on a campus. So behavior-specific praise is a really powerful way to help students connect what they're doing with what the expectations of that particular routine or context are. And a way that we can apply universal design a little bit more clearly with our behavior-specific praise is to add some elements that help all students to be able to access and understand what we mean when we're giving that specific praise. So linking it with a visual, either something gestural or something pictorial that the student can really connect with and understand is a way of being able to do that. So we have a brief little video example of my dear friend Christy explaining how, for their students with extensive support needs, how they've linked the visual with the behavior-specific praise in a couple of different ways.
So we have gestures for being safe, be responsible, and being kind, so that all students have access to sharing information through whatever communication means they have. So it's be safe, be responsible, and be kind.
Cool. I love it.
So they've developed gestures that they use that are paired with their 3 expectations. as well as the lanyard you saw around her neck. They carry that with them everywhere so that they can not only verbally acknowledge, but show the icon or the picture to the student when they're giving the feedback. And if that isn't their mode of communication or the best way for them to understand what they're being acknowledged for, they have the gestures that they use. So the 5-to-1 magic ratio is great. And believe me, it's a lot easier to say than it is to do. But what the research is showing us is that some students actually require a little bit higher ratio. And our neurodiverse students and some of our students who maybe have a history of trauma actually require a little bit higher ratio to see those same positive results. So intensifying your ratio of positives to correctives and also offering additional choices of rewards can be some additional powerful ways to be able to adapt this for certain student groups. So you get the most power out of this particular aspect of PBIS. So what does this actually look like when it's happening? We have a video clip that we want to show you, and you'll notice down on the bottom, there's a count. There's a count of the positives to the correctives. And this is an amazing teacher giving her regular lesson. And you'll see her use intentional behavior-specific praise and corrective feedback. But at the bottom, it's going to keep count of the ratio. So we wanted to just give you a sense of what this looks like. And this is actually in a high school, I believe a science class, that you're going to see this being utilized.
For being on time. Thank you to all of you who were on time today. You see, Marissa's not in here anymore. Yes, sir. Let's get your starter out. I don't have a starter. So what do you do if you don't have a starter? Yeah, a starter. I don't have yours, but I can get you a new one. Okay. I know. I'm just saying. Can I have one? Yes, you can. The PBIS 4-to-1 strategy is that for every one corrective statement I might make, for instance, saying, Michael, will you please get out your paper? I'll follow it up with 4 positive statements. So maybe saying, thank you for getting your paper out, or thank you for getting your pencil out. And then throughout the period, I'll continue those positive statements. Thank you, Elmer, for working on your starter. Thank you, Jace. Ladies, thank you. 5 seconds, finish up your last thought. Okay, thank you guys so much for being quiet. That was amazing.
Duplicate of that something?
A duplicate of that something. That was an awesome answer. Jace, what did he say again? I heard you say it too.
A duplicate.
A duplicate. Thank you, Jace. So a duplicate of something. Now, a positive statement, to me, a positive statement is praising the child or the student for something they did that was correct, that was following my expectation or my procedure. So anything I see that follows an expectation, I'm going to acknowledge it and I'm going to make a positive statement regarding it. So, hey, Michael, thank you so much for doing your starter. Thank you so much for following the procedure of working on your starter. Somebody knows this in here. Raise your hand if you can tell me what replication means.
Replicate?
You take an old song, you make it new again. You take pieces of the old song, but you kind of change it up. That's not necessarily DNA replication. We're making an exact copy of it. Okay? Thank you for that input, Jace. Look at me go. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for raising your hand. That's perfect. Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you.
A little bit of a lag there. That was intentionally fast forwarding through some of the lesson because I don't think we need to learn the biology part. It was just really illustrating, though, that 4-to-1 in this case, that she was aiming for positives to corrective feedback. And just in that short window of time, there were 10 positives for the one corrective piece of feedback that she gave to a student. So that's what it looks like in practice. And it does take practice to get really good at acknowledging and using those positive praise statements. But it's incredibly powerful, and it completely transforms the student's sense of safety and belonging, to have a teacher that provides that ratio of positive to corrective. And a lot of our students need a lot more of that. All right, so acknowledgement tickets, or the bucks, that are oftentimes handed out on campuses that are implementing PBIS. I'm going to tell you the real story, and I didn't know this for the longest time, but the use of the tickets and or the bucks actually is a lot more about changing adult behavior than it is about the student behavior. When we say we want to increase the frequency of acknowledgement for students following the expectations, how do we know that the adults are doing that? We might be able to observe it. We might be able to do a frequency count like you saw in that video. But really the recording of the adults acknowledging students comes through the use of the tickets. And by having that concrete reminder for the adults to acknowledge the students for the expected behaviors, changes the adult behavior. It increases, promotes the adults using the positive recognition systems. So this is an example of a school store dollar or a Panther buck. And you'll notice that it has a place for the name of the person it's being presented to, the name or the initials of the person it's being presented by, and what it's being given for. It also identifies the location where it's being given and which of the expectations the student was following in order to receive that. That's all data. That's all information. Not only do we know how many times that student maybe has been acknowledged through the receipt of the Panther buck, but we know which staff have been giving it, and we know which location or which routines it was being handed out. And I'm going to circle back to that in just a minute, but just know that a lot of times through these systems and through some of these strategies, it's a lot more about changing the adult mindset and the adult behavior than it really is about necessarily changing the student behavior. And this is a great example of that. All right, so this kind of loops back to one of the questions that we hadn't answered last week. But there might be certain situations, time of day, routines, maybe when a substitute teacher is in a particular classroom, where we might be able to predict that students might engage in, might not be engaging in as many of the expected behaviors as we would like to see. So we can create a condition with golden ticket or the $2 buck, where during these times of day or these situations that maybe are a little bit more problematic, we can give out a little added incentive. And so this is an example here. When a substitute teacher is on campus in a particular classroom, we might expect the students not to be following all of the same expectations, but when they do, they can be acknowledged a little extra through a golden ticket that's worth 2 instead of just 1. So some examples of tickets and school store systems. Emily, go ahead and click one more. I think there's one more example. There we go. Here's a variety of different examples. But notice that all of them share those common elements: who earned it, for what expected behavior, who issued it, and the time of day or the setting that it was given in. In Tier 1 PBIS, a lot of times we're looking at our data to know if there are particular routines that maybe are more problematic, where we're seeing higher rates of unexpected behavior, where students are struggling and we're seeing more behavior challenges happening. The use of the acknowledgement system, the first order of business would be to probably reteach the expectations for that routine and then up the frequency of acknowledgement during those routines. And this gives us the ability to be able to track that. So if the cafeteria has been particularly problematic, we might reteach the cafeteria expectations and then start really pouring on a lot more of the acknowledgement and the tickets during the cafeteria, during lunchtime routines. And we'd be able to know if that was actually happening, if the adults were actually doing that by the number of tickets that had cafeteria marked as the location where it was being given out.
So one of the things to also consider when we're looking at acknowledgement and creating this tier 1 system that we're really trying to make sure we acknowledge everyone is thinking about proactively planning for the variability of your learners when it comes to acknowledgement. And I think sometimes, when we're thinking about, our tier 1 is going to be this wonderful way of acknowledging, we might not be thinking about our students who don't want public praise or don't want public acknowledgement, or might actually be so much more excited if we take their point and put it to the group point, with where they're sitting in a classroom. Like, they might get so much more enjoyment and excitement. And so there is a praise preference assessment folder linked here. And on the next couple slides, I'll show you a few things that are in there. But one of the things we really want to think about is think about some different ways that your learners might want to receive praise. And that could even be by allowing the school to vote and kind of look at the whole range of what students might like. And maybe there's 3 or 4 different ways that students are receiving acknowledgement, all part of that tier 1, but kind of keeping that variability in mind, that what one person might see as really wonderful feedback and might really encourage behavior, for others might be like, oh, please do not even call me out in front of all these people, even if it's positive. So just really thinking about that variability and like knowing the students on your campus and thinking about their interests as well. So in this folder, there's also a student reward option form, a student reinforcer questionnaire, and you're welcome to use these or use them to create something else based on what you have available. And I think especially when we're thinking about what is it that students are going to be earning, it's going to go back to the variability of your own site and what you have available and what your students are interested in. And it's so many unique things, and some of them might be very specific to your site. I remember, oh, this keeps happening. I'm sorry. I remember years ago, we had a student on site who was just so excited to learn how things were made and done, just very interested in general handiwork. And all he wanted to do was earn time with our maintenance crew, and they would just be with them and they would explain what they were doing. And sometimes it was like repairing electrical, sometimes it was repairing plumbing, but he was just so fascinated. Part of it was that relationship piece and having the conversation with them. And then part of it was just the actually learning about something he was really interested in. So thinking about your staff, I know at my own children's school, the PE teacher is like the coolest human on campus. All the students just love the PE teacher. So I don't know, being a PE teacher assistant for the day or even for a time or a period, but getting really creative with the things that you have on campus and the things that students get excited about. This is an example of PCOE classroom, Placer County Office of Ed, classroom positive behavior buck. And they're tier 1, they have this lovely positive behavior buck. But some students require a little more frequency of reinforcement, maybe some tier 3, tier 2, tier 3 supports. And they are really conscious about connecting that to the tier 1 support. And so even if students need a little more individualized reinforcement, we can still utilize this system that the whole school is enjoying in order to really be thoughtful about how we're including all students. Even a student with extensive support needs can follow these expectations, and likely these are the expectations you're teaching to them. So there's absolutely no reason not to connect it in this very inclusive and wonderful way where they get to be a part of something that everybody else gets to be a part of as well. One of the things that's really important about, again, thinking about that variability, thinking about those barriers that sometimes come up for our learners is that we want to be really thoughtful in how we're removing barriers to make sure that everybody can access these expectations and access this acknowledgement. And so even if our students maybe have more physical barriers, like really getting creative with how are these going to travel with them. And so these are a couple examples of a lanyard where there's tally marks for when they're getting reinforced for being respectful, responsible, and safe, still part of that, those tier 1 expectations, but it travels with them on the lanyard. So all students can access that. And maybe that's going along with the para, maybe the teacher, maybe the student themselves, whatever works best, but really making sure we're getting thoughtful about how we're removing those barriers. So we are going to watch a short little video here, and this is an example of a high school that does a quarterly reward day, and students can save up their tickets and they have access to all of this fun stuff as part of this reward system. It's just kind of getting creative and thoughtful. So we're going to watch this little example.
Welcome to the Salazar First Quarter Fun Fest. This is for our PBIS awards, and our students earn Saint Bucks for being responsible, respectful, and ready to learn. We have a lot of different stations out here.
So as you can see, we have drinks. Students can get nachos, they can get hot dogs, they can get chili fries. We have some activity games, a ring toss game, raffles. Again, it's a partnership also with ATP, so you have a lot of the ATP students here on site helping out and participating. It's just a good time for us to get together to celebrate the end of the quarter and have a good time.
We do 3 of these a year for our students, or 4, 1 per quarter, and our students really love the ability to get out here and have snacks together, and they've earned it all, so it's just an amazing time and a great staff collaboration together, led by our PBIS coach.
So just a fun way to make sure that we're really encouraging this, creating this clear feedback and having a real reason for, utilizing those tickets. All kinds of fun things we can do with that. So I'm going to ask us right now to do a second poll, and I would love for you to think about your current school-wide acknowledgement system. And it's just a quick yes or no. And I would love to hear, are all students on campus currently involved in your school-wide acknowledgement process? And I'm going to have you answer in this poll. They're coming in. It's wild to see how quickly these answers come in. Thank you, guys. The second part of this is, because there's a lot of yeses, which is fantastic. And I'm going to say, those of you answering yes, we would love to see in the chat, how do you do it? How do you make it work? What's the secret sauce and how is it going? Some schools, not all. I don't know. I love it. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the poll. It looks like these have ended. Love it. Hey, so 59% say yes. That's amazing. And 41% no. That's okay. But honestly, I'm so impressed by the 59%. That's amazing. Okay. So I got lots of having those golden tickets, universal rewards, coyote coupons, school pride tickets, weekly drawings, recognition at Friday flagpole, good behavior tickets, school-wide assemblies, Si se puede ticks, love it, shining star. Awesome. If anyone wants to share any specifics of maybe they're making sure that all students, all classrooms are accessing that tier 1, I would love to hear any specifics in that too. PBIS rewards, PBIS team, and very active ORC on campus, trimester wildcat party. Awesome. Love it. Thank you guys so much for sharing. Please feel free to continue to share your specifics. We would love to hear.
Emily, one of the things that I'm noticing that I really like is that there's a lot of variation between individual student acknowledgement and sort of group-based acknowledgement and opportunities for kind of school-based rewards. And having those layers, having that variability, can really add a lot to the acknowledgement system, because if a student isn't so much into the individual, but they really like the classroom-based and or the school-based activities, you have a lot of variability there. So it's cool to see those kind of stacked systems.
Yes, thank you. All right. So we've talked about monitoring and acknowledging, and we're going to dive into how to kind of create those instructional responses as well. This comic, if you can't quite see it here, there are 2 teachers talking, and one teacher has a classroom door open, and there's just kind of students piling on top of each other, things flying everywhere. And it says, "Can you help me, Mrs. Martin? This was not covered in any of my education courses." So just really important to remember that we want all of staff to be able to have this range of tools for how they're responding to behaviors in an instructional way. And remembering that behavior is a form of communication, and really thinking about what is the need here? What is the student needing? And really making sure that our responses are teaching the expectation and not just suppressing behavior. So we're not just responding because we're looking for compliance, but because we actually are trying to teach a skill. Really creating that consistency across all staff, not stuff, sorry about that, consistency around staff, really to reduce that confusion for students and make sure that those instructional responses are really supporting that dignity and building skills for the future. And so a couple of specific ways that we want to do that. So this is an image of what maybe some behavior escalation might look like, right? So start with the calm, and then there's a little trigger, and then there's that agitation, a little bit of acceleration. And once you've hit that acceleration, man, oh man, does it go high in the sky, right? And then we have that de-escalation, and then eventually the recovery. So this idea of really thinking about how are we preventing behaviors is really coming across as how are we heading this off before the trigger, before that known trigger, and making sure that we're really thinking about a pre-correction. We're establishing those clear expectations before we start an activity that we know is maybe a trigger for some, right? I think the perfect example in a classroom setting is anytime we're getting started to do group work. Let's talk about all the expectations when it comes to group work. What are all the roles and responsibilities of everyone? If we disagree, because we know we will, that's what happens in group work. How are we going to speak to each other? But like really thinking about that prevention piece as how are we teaching expectations and reminding about them in clear, consistent ways, rather than going into a trigger and letting things explode. So then, second part of this is redirecting behavior, right? So after there's been a trigger, agitation is starting, right? And somewhere in between agitation and acceleration, or maybe right at agitation, we're really noticing those low levels of behavior escalation, and we're intervening with a redirection, an alternative behavior, any type of use of skill. And one of the greatest ways to do this is to be prepared, right? We know there's going to be times where behavior escalates, and it's just something that's going to happen. And so how can we be prepared with a variety of tools and supports so that when that happens, we're ready to roll? So really thinking about how we're universally designing how we're going to pre-correct or prompt or redirect. And those visuals of clear expectations that are consistent across a student's day. If there is a staff that's following that student, maybe a paraprofessional, making sure they have access to all of these visuals, or having supports at their desk, or having visuals in the areas they're going. But really thinking about how are we going to redirect or prompt in a way that's not going to escalate, but is going to kind of, well, de-escalate and hopefully also distract a little sometimes too is helpful. Thinking about those in the moment choices we can provide can be a really great way to prevent that escalation. Like really do you want to do 3 math problems or 5? Okay, we need to go to the office. Do you want to walk with me or in front of me? Office is probably not a good example. We need to go to our next class together. You can walk with me or in front of me. You can either give the iPad to me or put it in the put it in the box, but we're all done with iPad time. I can help you with the first one, or you can try it on your own, but it is time for work. You pick either one. What would you like to do after you finish your reading? Time for reading. Pick your choice for when we're done. Do you want me to start the timer, or would you like to start the timer? Like really keeping your firm goal in mind, but providing some sort of a choice in that moment can help with that de-escalation and also provide a little bit of power, let's say. All right, I'm going to pass it to Patty to talk a little bit about contextually inappropriate behavior.
Emily, I wanted to kind of go back to the redirection a little bit and talk about the importance of, with the expected behaviors, making sure that there's some routines that are taught for calming and regulation. And one that I see used a lot and can be really powerful is like the smell the flower, blow out the candle, just a simple visual support for deep breathing. Because it's incompatible to be engaging in deep breathing and escalating at the same time. They're like physically incompatible. And if we've gone through a process of teaching that routine of what do you do with that visual support, you smell the flower, you blow out the candle. That's a perfect strategy to be able to use to redirect when we start to see some of that agitation. And a lot of people think of those kinds of techniques as being individual for individual students that need them, but just about anybody could benefit. If you do your box breathing and you teach that, perfect redirection when you start to see those signs of agitation. So really thinking about ways of pulling those in, teaching them proactively, but then pulling them in as a way of redirecting behavior, and using the visuals, because the visual a lot of times can be processed when someone's getting a little bit agitated, where the auditory and the verbal is just more agitation, right? So thank you for that.
I love that.
All right. All right. So now we get to talk about contextually inappropriate behavior. And, we used to refer to these as behavior problems or problem behavior, but we've changed the way that we really think about and talk about contextually inappropriate behavior in PBIS now. And there's a really important reason for this. When I say problem behavior or behavior problem, what does that automatically set you up to want to do? Usually it's to provide some type of consequence. It's a behavior problem. It's problematic. I need to respond with some sort of punishment or to give some kind of consequence for that behavior problem. So we have changed the way that we look at and think about behavior that maybe is not appropriate to the setting or the situation or the context, because behavior could be really appropriate if the context was a little different. Context is everything. Context matters. The state of the learner, what they bring into the scenario, the environment itself, all is part of the equation. And yes, students do sometimes engage in behavior that's not appropriate to the context. And we don't just want to ignore it. We want to give some instruction and some corrective feedback whenever that happens. But the first thing we have to do is to really change the way that we think about and talk about those behaviors and recognize wholeheartedly that context is a contributor. And we have some control over context. We can influence that a little by design. So what is a definition of a contextually inappropriate behavior? So these are actions, responses, or expressions that deviate from the accepted social, cultural, or situational norms, or behavior expectations, or norms, making them unsuitable for that particular setting. And the context, understanding contextually inappropriate behaviors really requires looking beyond the action itself to really examining the setting, the people involved, the timing, which are the things that determine whether the behavior is actually a behavior that's contextually appropriate or inappropriate to the context. So we're going to illustrate this for you in a little activity. Go on to that next one for me. All right, we're going to play a little game. We want you to use the chat to be able to give your responses to these examples. So we're going to put up a little scenario, and we want you to identify if this is a contextually inappropriate behavior. You would write CIB in the chat, or a contextually appropriate behavior. Okay, Emily, you want to pop the first one in there for us? All right, so the first example, screaming at a baseball game. All right, I see them coming in. Contextually appropriate behavior. Yeah, screaming, totally acceptable, appropriate at a baseball game. If we're excited, if our team just scored, if we're trying to psych the other team out a little bit, totally appropriate. Okay, how about screaming at my teacher? Same behavior. Contextually inappropriate behavior, people are saying. Okay, all right. Well, what about if I'm screaming at my teacher because a ball is coming for her head? Contextually appropriate. Context is everything. Screaming at the teacher. If there's a fastball coming right for her, yeah, totally appropriate. In fact, I would expect that I would be acknowledged for engaging in some safe behaviors by warning my teacher that something unsafe was about to happen. All right. How about this next one? Scratching my arm because it itches. Scratching's the behavior. My arm because it itches. Contextually appropriate. Yep, we would totally expect that. It's the way we deal with a itchy arm. All right, how about scratching the teacher when she asks me to give up a toy? Contextually inappropriate. Yep, pretty clear. What about scratching the teacher when asked to give up a toy and I have my AAC device and have been taught how to ask for more time to play? Contextually inappropriate. I have a way of being able to communicate what I need, what I want. That's acceptable and appropriate. So scratching in that context is inappropriate. But let me change this up a little bit. What if I know how to use my AAC device to request more time with a preferred activity, and my communication device is not accessible to me because it is over in my cubby, and I scratch my teacher when she asks me to give up a toy? Contextually inappropriate or contextually appropriate? Interesting. Okay, we got some mixed reviews on that one. All right. So a student has a way of being able to express themselves appropriately, but they don't have access to the tool that they need to be able to do that. Their intent is to communicate, to express the desire, the need for more time. We haven't, by design, given them access to the tool that they need to do that in the acceptable, appropriate, defined way. So it's a design issue. It's an adult issue, really more than it is a student issue. So part of making sure that our students engage in contextually appropriate behaviors, making sure they have the things that they need to be able to regulate, to be able to communicate, to be able to move if they need to move in an appropriate and acceptable way. So thank you guys for doing that with us. And hopefully that helped you see that it's really not just about the behavior, screaming, scratching. It's all about the context. And whether it's contextually appropriate or contextually inappropriate depends on a lot of things that are going on in the environment, as well as the state of the learner who's in that environment and what they have available to them to be able to actually function their best. Okay. All right, so as we're thinking about how to respond to contextually inappropriate behavior, we want to make sure that we're really thinking about and embracing these neurodiversity affirming principles. The first being that regulation is not treated as misconduct. So behaviors like stimming, movement, or looking away or filtering might possibly be related to regulation or regulatory needs. I had a student that I worked with several years ago that would constantly cover his ears. He was always covering his ears, and he couldn't listen to teacher direction when he was covering his ears. We couldn't figure out what was going on. Why is he covering his ears? Why is he covering his ears? And it was always on Mondays, and it was always during the morning time where this behavior was happening. Turns out that was the day that they would come on campus with the leaf blower. And he had severe auditory sensitivity. And it was not perceptible by us. You know, we just went about our business. But to him, it was like a freight train. And so he would cover his ears. So thinking about some of those filtering and some of those regulation type of behaviors and the state that our student might be in and what their needs are, that's all part of the context. So neurodiversity affirming principle number 1, regulation is not treated as misconduct. The second, support happens before escalation. Students should be offered regulation or clarification before implementing any kind of corrective feedback or punitive consequence. The third, impact matters more than appearance. So the question is not, is the student complying? It should be, is anyone unsafe or unable to learn? And then the fourth neurodiversity affirming principle that we want people to really think about and embrace is staff interpret behavior as communication. Ask, is this regulation? Is this a skill gap? Is the environment contributing? And I think the example that I gave about the student scratching the teacher when they didn't have access to their AAC device, the environment was contributing. The lack of access to the tool was contributing to the occurrence of the scratching as the only means that they had available to them to communicate and express the need or want. So with these neurodiversity principles in mind, thinking about our PBIS and our responses to contextually inappropriate behavior, we also want to make sure that we're matching responses to the intensity of behavior and thinking about a continuum of responses to different escalations or different intensities of behavior that may be occurring. And so we help teams to be able to define some of the less intensive types of behaviors that really are staff managed, things that can be managed within the context of the classroom or by the staff that's assigned to the particular area, that are non-recorded, maybe staff managed that you do want to document in order to be able to make note of some things about what's happening, and then administrator managed, which are always recorded. And those might be office discipline referrals, when the student actually needs to be seen outside of that context by someone in response to their behavior. So In PBIS, teams create the clear definitions of behaviors and a flowchart that clarifies the responses to try for those low-level behaviors and to try as things progress a little bit more. The goal of creating those definitions and those flowcharts is consistency of responses, so that there's equity and safety in the clarity of knowing what's okay, what's not okay in the school environment. And I love this quote by Kent McIntosh, who's the current director of the National Center on PBIS. Subjectivity is disproportionality's best friend. By defining, by being really clear, and by having those response flowcharts available, we're taking a lot of the subjectivity out of it and therefore creating that consistency and that equity. So here's what that might look like. Defining behaviors and levels of response. On the left-hand side, these are staff or classroom managed behaviors that wouldn't necessarily be recorded. Data wouldn't be collected on these. And there are things like refusal to start or stop an activity when respectfully asked to by staff, using their body or materials in a way that prevents others from being able to learn safely. And so we have the definitions of those. And then the next level up is a little bit more intense, maybe a little bit more disruptive to the learning of students in the classroom. Maybe there have been some attempts to do some prevention and redirection, but the behavior is continuing. And so those would be staff or classroom managed, but they would be recorded. And then the definitions of those office or administrator managed, office discipline referrals. A lot of times these are tied with school discipline policy, and some of the overarching definitions are part of the school adopted discipline descriptions and policy that maybe align also with district policy around suspensions and things like that. But important that they're defined and that everybody understands and is able to clearly delineate when those types of behaviors are occurring versus lower levels of behavior. So defining them is the first part and identifying that range. And then creating a flow chart. And this is an example of a response flow chart. You identify the continuum of strategies that staff should try when there is a contextually inappropriate behavior that occurs, from those low levels up to where is the point at which the office discipline referral or the staff or the admin managed behavior, where is that continuum? So we have those examples for you to be able to look at, and we have a little close-up of a response flow chart on the next slide. So the continuum of responses to contextually inappropriate behavior. On the left-hand side, those blue responses, things like planned ignoring, moving closer to the student, signaling, giving some kind of nonverbal cue, like the look, or tapping on the expectations that maybe are on the desk, using praise for appropriate behavior of others, because that's kind of redirecting their attention to what they should be doing, and or using an actual redirection. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. These are all things that a staff or teacher could do while continuing to teach. So pretty low level, pretty easy to implement, can be really effective for a lot of individuals. We want to make sure that we're thinking about the learner though. So for example, some students may not cue into a lot of the nonverbal communication signals that are listed on that left-hand side. Proximity might not cue them into, oh, I better, think about what I'm doing. Or the look. They may notice the look, but not really interpret the look in the way that it should signal them. So know your students and think about the continuum that's going to work given the students that you serve. On the right-hand side, these are a little bit more involved. Support for procedures or routines, doing a reteach, differential reinforcement. So looking for catching them being good, looking for things they are doing well, and trying to get that momentum of appropriate social emotional behavioral skills happening, using specific and contingent error correction. And I have the steps for doing that listed over on the right. And this takes practice too, just like the 5-to-1 ratio. It takes a little bit of practice to know how to respectfully address a student, describe the inappropriate or contextually inappropriate behavior, describe what you want them to do instead, and then name the thing that you'd like them to do. But once you get kind of the script down or the habit of doing it, it becomes very second nature. So it might look like, Emily, I noticed you haven't finished your work. That's the contextually inappropriate behavior. I'd love for you to show me how you can be responsible and finish some more problems before recess. Okay, now I've identified what I want her to do. I might even use a little UDL punch here and say, Emily, how many do you think you can get done before recess? She says 5. I draw a line on the paper. This is the line of demarcation. Emily, this is how many you think you can get done. Now I'm challenging her. Now I'm eliciting some motivation and maybe some buy-in, like, oh, I can get that many done. I might even throw in, I actually think you could get all the way to here and put a star on the paper where I think she can get to. And then I'm going to start praising her for, thank you so much for being responsible and getting back to work. It becomes pretty natural. And now I've got her challenged. Now I've got her re-engaged. I've got her motivated. She sees that line. It's represented on the paper. She knows how far she thinks she can get. That extra challenge is how far I think she can get. And we've got a nice little redirect back to the appropriate behavior. I didn't let her not do her work. I didn't just plan to ignore it. I pointed it out. I told her what I wanted her to do. I added a little challenge and redirected her back to the appropriate behavior. Okay, so we have gone through now, identify and define school-wide expectations, teaching and practicing them, monitoring and acknowledging the skills and routines, providing instructional responses when contextually inappropriate behavior occurs. This final piece that's part of those core characteristics and practices for Tier 1 PBIS is data-informed decisions. So Emily, if you'll go to that next slide. The purpose of collecting the data is to determine if behaviors are really routine or location specific and need to be addressed as a universal Tier 1 need, or if there may be student specific, which indicates that the student might need something more or something different, maybe a Tier 2 intervention, maybe the assistance of an additional intervention beyond Tier 1. How do we know, though, if it's a Tier 1 system need versus a student-specific need? So we have kind of a general rule of thumb. If 10% or more of the students are having issues or challenges within a specific setting, location, routine, time of day, it's a systems issue. You might as well reteach. You might as well think about how to restructure, bump up the acknowledgement for all students, because you have a high percentage of students who are having a challenge. It's a design issue. If it's less than 10%, then it may be a student-specific issue, challenge, or need, in which case they probably need something more or something a little bit different. And that's where, going back to that ice cream analogy, another scoop, another dose of teaching of the expectations, added acknowledgement for them, or maybe something where they're receiving an actual Tier 2 intervention like check-in, check-out, or a skills group or something like that would be the call at that point. Your Tier 1 systems, the left-hand side are some really important considerations. So leadership team that represents multiple and diverse perspectives co-create the systems on a campus. So we want you guys to really be thinking about, from a systems perspective, who would be important to include in your PBIS leadership team? Is it inclusive of people who really understand neurodiversity? Is it inclusive of student voice? Really keeping those things in mind. Procedures for selection, training, and coaching of new personnel. A question: are your special educators, are all staff really being included in your PBIS training opportunities? Do your special day class teachers, do your paraeducators, do they know and understand what the expectations are and how to teach them and what PBIS even is? If they're not being included in those training opportunities, how can they, as the adults, be expected to implement these interventions, these prevention aspects with all students? And then finally, make sure that your data includes all students, that you're not leaving out a group of students from that data system, because the data should tell you whether or not you have a systems and design issue or whether it's specific students who might need something more or something different. So those are some of the things to consider with your systems to make sure that you're doing to include all students. Emily, you got to wrap us up here.
I'm going to wrap you up. Sorry, time. I know. And I see Megan's like, hey guys, time. It's like the flag at the end of the Oscars. Not that this is the same as the flag. Anyway. So really, in conclusion, so when PBIS is really intentionally designed using these UDL principles, we can really help Tier 1 become more equitable, effective, and sustainable. And so some things we want to make sure we're thinking about: the learner variability across your whole school, really making sure that all learners can access that Tier 1 support. And when we really plan to include all in Tier 1, we can really, really reduce those Tier 2 and Tier 3 referrals. And really, really thinking about how are we adjusting our systems instead of fixing students, and really making sure that everyone can have that access. And it definitely is going to increase a sense of belonging and community when we really make sure we plan for those things. A few seeds we want to plant, some things that we love for you to consider as you're going back to your sites and thinking a little bit about who can access, who might not be accessing, some things to think about. In what ways can you utilize UDL to really minimize barriers to access on your campus or in your classroom? Is there a special education perspective on your PBIS team? Are special education staff being included in that PBIS training? Do they have a coach or mentor to support that adaptation? Are all students being captured in your Swiss data? Are all expectations being taught to all students? And are all getting all acknowledgements and supports equally accessible for those students with disabilities? Are we making sure that IEP behavior goals are aligning to the PBIS system as a means of inclusion, as a means of making sure we're using what's already there instead of inventing new things? And do we have a continuum of supports that anyone can access? Tier 3 supports, not just special education referrals, if that makes sense. All right, and finally, I know this was our intentional close last time, but we really, really are hoping that you're going back to your sites and thinking about who can access your Tier 1 PBIS, who cannot access, what barriers are there, and where you might make some adjustments here. And so just with these additional planning thoughts, we also have some resources linked here. Oh my gosh, for time, my goodness, I'm so sorry, Megan. We do have resources. They're all located on the home base document and also here as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Emily and Patty. Your presentations for this entire series has been so incredibly welcome and much needed in the season that we are in. I also want to give a special thank you to Gay and Jasmine for their ASL interpretation throughout the series. We would very much appreciate if you would complete the post-session survey in the chat. This will help us design professional learning in the future for everyone. And you'll also find a link to the certificate of completion for today. You can access today's resources and recording on our website. Please give us a couple weeks to get the recordings up, as we like to make sure that we're really thoughtful in our closed captioning and capture that accurately. So that will take a couple of weeks. And we can absolutely send an email as well when those are ready to go. On behalf of Supporting Innovative Practices, Open Access, and California PBIS, thank you for your commitment to designing and enacting systems where every learner can stay engaged, supported, and included. We appreciate all of you and wish you a wonderful evening.